And thank you very much, Prof, for joining us. We do appreciate your time. You've written an article about non-compliant workplaces in South Africa generally. You say this is generally a problem. We know, and we've spoken to the Inspector General of Labour, who told our programme recently they did about 3,000 workplace inspections and about 40% were non-compliant. This is for the new lockdown rules. Why are we non-compliant, do you think?
Well, good evening. I think the reason that we have high levels of non-compliance is because there has been a culture of non-compliance that's been allowed to develop amongst employers, because the Department of Employment and Labour's Inspectorate has not been proactive enough in normal times in inspecting workplaces to ensure compliance with occupational health and safety and making sure that UIF is paid for workers. And what we see now, and in these extraordinary times, is the Department of Employment and Labour is still not taking its inspectorate duties seriously enough. So although that they have done 3,000 inspections, in the first 30 days of lockdown, they only had 170 inspectors doing inspections. Meanwhile, they employ 1,800 inspectors. So this is less than 10% of the inspectorate's capacity being used. And even then, on average, each inspector only conducted one inspection every 2 days.
Why would they not be using every single inspector that they have in their capacity to make sure that workplaces are compliant?
So it could be that not all inspectors would be trained in occupational health and safety, but given the extraordinary times that we face, and given the knowledge that the Department of Employment and Labour has around the general levels of non-compliance, I do think it's quite extraordinary that they have not utilised more capacity from the inspector. 170 inspectors does seem to be very little out of the possible 1,800 that they employ.
So where does that leave the average worker? Many people in South Africa, if they don't work, they don't get paid. So they are desperate to get back to work, and they're hardly likely to rock the boat if they arrive at work and nothing's been cleaned and there's no mask for them. So where does that leave the average worker?
Absolutely, and again, this is one of the major problems with the Inspectorate's approach to inspections under this current period. The Inspector General has said that they are driven by reports from workers of non-compliance. But as you point out, under this current period and the economic uncertainty that companies and workers are facing, very few workers are probably going to want to report their employer. So this means that the Department of Employment and Labour has to be proactive in its inspection approach to ensure that safety is at the foremost of any company that is reopening, so that workers' lives are not put at risk.
What are the basics that need to be in place if someone is preparing to go back to work? What are the things that they should be expecting?
First of all, before a company reopens, they must conduct a risk assessment and write up a plan of how they're going to operate with conditions like how they're going to get social distancing in the workplace, how they're going to do environmental controls, better ventilation in the workplace, as well as doing the basic things we would expect around masks and sanitisers. And if that's a company that's more than 500 workers, then that plan must also be submitted to the Department of Employment and Labour.
So without that plan or approval of that plan for a bigger company, am I right that they shouldn't be reopening?
So the department doesn't approve the plans really, but it must be submitted to the Department of Employment and Labour as one of the conditions for reopening.
And for smaller companies, they can just reopen, and if they get inspected and found lacking, they can be shut down, of course.
Well, of course, being shut down is the most extreme measure the Department of Employment and Labour can take. But what we do see is largely the Department of Employment and Labour has been issuing compliance orders, but has rarely been taking the step of closing down companies. And it may be that the Department wants to consider taking much more stringent measures against employers that are not compliant.
Thank you very much. That was Professor Carin Runciman from the University of Johannesburg.